Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock. Let's go over what is happening in the market, what happened today after a initially not so bad earnings report and then the conference call. Let's just say things went downhill pretty quickly after the conference call. So I'll go over the chart. Let's go over what's happening. Is the stock officially bearish now? Is it time to watch out? Are we going much lower or can this be a bottom potentially? Let's talk about it, right? So if you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor. And of course, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts on the charts, etc., well, again, I do share my thoughts with my members every single day as the market is open, trading, etc. Constantly sharing thoughts, posts, updates in the YouTube membership. Again, link is in the description below if you're interested in joining. It's just $3 a month for the first year, which of course includes all my Tesla updates. $5 adds NVDA to that as well, and then $7 adds non-Tesla, non-NVIDIA updates, charts, etc. that I post as well for members. And on the weekend, I do chart requests on Discord with members. But jumping into a Tesla, pretty painful day today, down about 8.2% on the day, just above $305 per share, which obviously compared to the market is going to be, a little bit of an underperformance, obviously. So where does this put Tesla? Is Tesla officially bearish? Is it, concerning? Or can this, actually have a potential to be, a bottom and we are actually still bullish? So that's the big question, right? And, there's lots to go over. So let's go over the bigger picture first, right? Obviously, I've been talking about this bigger picture for quite some time, and I've been saying that, we're in this pennant, guys. We're still in this pennant. Even after today's drop, we actually went pretty much, pretty damn close, if not pretty much there, towards the bottom end of the pennant. And, we held. That's the most important things, at least as of right now, we held. Now, from here, obviously, let's talk about what to expect, right? So overall, while we're within this pennant, like I mentioned, we could potentially chop. We could a lot of people were expecting this earnings to break out the stock and make it go higher, right? Now, I was saying my ideal scenario, right, was just to get a nice little flag like this into about the 315 to 320 region, which we actually did for a little bit. With all things, all things considered, we actually got that for a while, right? You can see we stopped around here. And then, of course, we had early morning pre-market open up, and then we ended up unfortunately, getting down below that range. So kind of is what it is. But initially, we were kind of getting what I was expecting, right? This little move into the 315 to 320 area, and then we lost it. But it is what it is. Now, that was my ideal scenario, right? I mean, it doesn't mean it'll play out. But overall, what I was mentioning is the fact that, guys, this is a pennant that we are in. It's technically a bullish pennant, but a pennant nonetheless. But there's a lot of room in this pennant, right? There was a lot of, and there still is, of course, a lot of room in this pennant. And, I mentioned how there is a possibility that we don't break out yet, right? This earnings isn't what breaks us out, and we may have to wait until maybe even closer into August itself to get a breakout one way or the other. So far, that seems to be the case. Now, there's arguments to be made, but, what possibly can lift up the stock right now? I mean, Robotaxi started, that market didn't really care that much, right? The conference call guidance wasn't necessarily the best sounding guidance in the entire world. In fact, it actually sounded kind of a little pessimistic, to be completely honest with you, for the next, few quarters or so, right? It wasn't the best guidance, but, you can also make the argument, but okay, so we had, not a great conference call or earnings call, just a conference call, earnings call, not a great one. We had all this Elon and Trump shenanigans down here with, Elon versus Trump, Elon and, calling Trump, on Epstein's list, whatever. All of this bad news, all the political stuff, and, now this horrible earnings call. But the stock is still hanging on at, about $300 per share or, give or take, of course. So you can also make the arguments, okay, maybe there's nothing like a crazy catalyst to push the stock up, but if even after all this bad news and we're still pretty much around $300 or higher, what is really going to truly break it down below? So there's two arguments to be made to both perspectives, which my answer to that is, well, that's why we're going sideways in a pennant. And that's why the stock is not actually going anywhere, right? Like I said, we're in a pennant. There's still a lot of room. There's a good chance we don't go anywhere. And then as we get closer to the apex of the pennant, we'll get either something bullish or something bearish. And then eventually we'll break down below or above this pennant. And then we should have our answer by then. As of right now, we're still within it. Nothing to be, worried or, for either direction. Neither direction is winning, bulls or bears. None of them are winning right now. So what are the main levels to watch for on the pennant though, right? Well, if Tesla pretty much loses about 300, 295 if you want to give it a bit more wiggle room, 295 to 300, something like that over the next, few days to a week or so. Yeah, that's the level to watch out for. That's the major support right around this general vicinity. To the upside, if we ever manage to get that, the major one, again, I'm talking about the major one, the pennant support and resistance, about 340, right? About $340 per share. Those are the main two levels that need to break down below or above to finally get actual movement and a direction for the stock. Because again, while we're within this pennant, we're going to continue most likely chopping, like I've been saying for quite some time. And so far, we're continuing to do that. So let's continue watching that. Now, let's go into the slightly shorter term. Now, people might argue this is a bit of a hammer candle. It's not really, in my opinion, right? In case you see anyone saying this is a hammer candle, mainly because the wick below is not long enough, or I should say, in other words, the body of the candle is, in my opinion, too big for how long the wick is. You want a smaller body than the wick, right? A decently smaller body, right? Like a 2-to-1 at least ratio, if not ideally a 3-to-1 ratio. Kind of like what Netflix is printing, actually. Netflix printed a potentially decent looking hammer candle. So this is, you can make an argument, looks like a hammer candle. Tesla, not only is red, but you can see the body much larger. So just figured I'd mention that in case people, other people start mentioning this is a hammer candle, this is a hammer candle. Not really. Anyways, so short term, right? Now, again, the short term, the stock, it's a little bit overextended to the downside, and it is, near major support, right? It is near major support. So as long as it pretty much holds 295 to 300, wouldn't be surprised, maybe even as early as tomorrow, but maybe into early next week, we get a bit of a bounce, right? Or at the very least, sideways action, one or the other, either to about 310 to 315, which is where the EMAs are. And then, of course, we will, of course, revisit how it reacts to that, right? Or at the very least, we go sideways, and essentially the bleeding slows down a little bit, right? I'd be surprised if we just lose 300, 295 and just start cratering as early as tomorrow, unless obviously some drastic news comes out. Of course, you can't predict that. But I'd be surprised if it happens too quickly, mainly because, we're pretty far away from the EMAs, right? Usually when the stock does something like this, it's not surprising to get either a dead cat or at the very least sideways action. And at the very least, wait for the 9 exponential moving average to catch up to price and then potentially start pushing it down and down and down and down. I think a decent example is actually Lululemon. That's the most recent one I can remember that did tank post earnings. Maybe not the best example. This one actually just continued cratering. So maybe not the best example. Usually that doesn't happen, but obviously if it's really bad, it can, I guess. Nothing is perfect, but usually that's not the case, right? Usually, especially in a stock like Tesla, especially because it is near, what seems to be support, of course, around 300. I wouldn't be surprised if we get even a small bounce into 310, maybe best case scenario 315 tomorrow or like early next week. And then of course we'll have to reassess as to what happens next based on how it reacts in that what now should be a resistance zone, unfortunately, for the bulls, right? So that's kind of what I'll be looking for short term, right? On the 1 hour, you can get like a little bit of a kind of bear flaggy type situation over here, right? That'll look something like this, right into that kind of general vicinity, like I said. And then, again, we'll reassess if and when we get there, right? One step at a time, of course. So that's gonna be the main thing I'll be watching for, kind of short term, right? On the daily, on the 1 hour time frame, even like maybe the 15-minute time frame, et cetera, right? The 15-minute is starting to make a little bit of a bullish short-term pivot, which, could lead Tesla to overall rebound at least a little bit. But again, there is going to be some work to do for bulls once again, because like I said many times over, every time we've cratered down below, we've recovered pretty decently, and we've actually recovered back above the EMAs pretty nicely each and every single time before they had that full bearish crossover. So as usual, I'm pretty much watching the same thing again. Can Tesla recover back above the exponential moving averages, essentially above 315 to 320, once again, the same way we did here, and recover the exponential moving averages before they get that full bearish crossover amongst each other? So let's see, right? That's going to be the main thing to watch out for. This could have been that, but it wasn't, obviously, and now, bears have a second shot here potentially. But overall, again, don't be too surprised if we still get another maybe week, maybe even 2 weeks of chop overall on Tesla stock before we truly pick a direction one way or the other on this sort of pennant that we are in. So hopefully that overall kind of makes sense. The final thing I'll mention on the daily before I jump over to the weekly very quickly is going to be, well, obviously we have, the SMI was, elevated, right? I talked about in my members before also how the 4-hour SMI was also pretty elevated, nearing resistance as well, right? We talked about how, 335 needed to break and we just couldn't get closures above that, right? So there were signs that, maybe it's looking a little bit shaky, of course, but again, with earnings, you never know for sure, but clearly it was. And the final thing I'll talk about is this. So there's 2 ways to get worried, I guess, for Tesla stock. The first way, like I mentioned, is just simply losing this pennant, right? Obviously going below this pennant, and that's number one. You get an earlier warning signal from this perspective, I guess you can say, but it has a higher chance, in my opinion, to also potentially be a false flag, I guess, right? What is a stronger tell that it's not looking too good, guys, for the bulls? is breaking a lower low, making a lower low, I should say, right? Because again, we had this massive move up, and what are we doing in this pennant? We're making higher lows, lower highs, right? Lower high, high, lower high, lower high. We set this low here, higher low, potentially a higher low being set right here as well, right? So breaking a high or breaking a low, so the recent lower high or the higher low would be that flag. For instance, if Tesla breaks this low right here, which is all the way down at about $290 per share, you know, you're gonna have to suffer a little bit more pain to get that signal, but that'll probably be a stronger signal. The fact that, you know, we're no longer chopping in this kind of pennant, making lower highs, higher lows. But instead, now we broke down below this low. We broke this kind of chain, this pattern, if you will. And now that should mean that, you know, we most likely continue lower after that as well. So there's two ways to look at it. One is quicker, but has higher chance of being a false flag. The other one obviously still has a chance of being a false flag. Nothing is perfect, but, you know, it should be a stronger tell, but you may have to suffer a little bit more pain in order to really get that information. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, all in all, the targets to the downside and to the upside. If we break below the pennant, I do believe that we most likely reach about 240, 50-ish dollars per share, which I mentioned before is going to be the green fibs right here. If you go over here like this, bam, that'll bring us right to these green fibs, which I think personally, as of right now, will be a phenomenal opportunity if we ever get this opportunity, of course. That'll be what I'll be looking for to the downside if we break below this pennant, in my opinion, and especially if we lose about 290. To the upside, pretty much if we break pretty much 335 to 340 at some point, yeah, I think, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if we retest very high 300s, probably even into the 400s, honestly, right? That will be my target to the upside if we break above the pennant and northwards, if you will. So that's going to be that. Now, the last thing I'll talk about quickly, which I'll also talk about tomorrow, but also right now, is going to be the weekly. Now, the weekly obviously is showcasing the same idea, massive pennant, blah, blah, blah. But the main reason I want to put your attention to on the weekly is because the MACD actually was crossing bullish earlier this week, when just before earnings, actually. It was green, it was bullish. Unfortunately, we're not getting that bullish crossover. We're still having issues here. I really want to see this go back to bullish and close a week bullish. Very low chance it's going to happen this week, but something worth mentioning that I'm also watching, right? If we get the MACD start closing, you know, green on the weekly, good sign. That tells me that the bulls are starting to take over. But the other thing I wanted to pay point your attention to is the weekly candle. The weekly candle, if it closes anything like this, essentially if it closes below 317, roughly, we'll say even, most likely we'll print a bearish engulfing weekly candle, which could be a bit of a concern, right? So that's just something else that's worth mentioning. It will be a bearish engulfing. We have the weekly SMI, obviously, you know, curling to the downside, still pointing straight down. So the weekly will have problems there, right? If we print a bearish engulfing weekly and also lose 300, or again, if you're giving it that extra wiggle room, 290, yeah, bad signs, guys. Those will be very, very bad signs. We're not there yet, though. We're not there yet. Good chance we do print the bearish engulfing, but like all bearish patterns, you need confirmation, which essentially is going below that range and closing, in this case, a weekly candle below that candle's low, which in this case, let's say we close at 310 tomorrow as an example, and the low of this week was set at pretty much 300. Well, if we close another week below 300, let's say next week, even further going to be cause for concern, because that also should start triggering this bearish engulfing candle, right? Again, we're not there yet. I'm just giving you things to potentially watch out for, potentially to, you know, look out for, etc. But as it stands right now, I still don't think, you know, either side can claim victory. We're still within this pennant. You know, I'm sure bulls were claiming victory here, and they were. I remember it very vividly. Bears were claiming victory here. They were. I also remember that vividly. Just for all of them to be wrong as we continue chopping, and they're all getting chopped up like liver. So we need to break out of this pennant. Otherwise, neither side is winning yet. Eventually, one will, but we don't have that direction just yet. So just worth mentioning. Anyways, thanks for watching. Options flow, I guess let's talk about options flow very quickly. Towards the end of the day, you know, very bearish in the morning, but towards the end of the day, it's a little bit of bearishness here, but you can see a lot of bullishness that come in for tomorrow and also next week. So I think the bulls are trying to buy this dip. I think they're trying to send this one back up to about 310, 315. Wouldn't be surprised if we get that, but that's where the test will start to come in, and we'll have to reassess, of course, how it reacts around that now seemingly resistance area around 315 to 320 again. Anyways, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.